start live streaming again, and we'll continue to work through our other items list. And I would like to start with the Women's Memorial Rest Building in Clive Square, which a number of councillors have wished to discuss further, but I'd like to invite Councillor Brown to open up for this one.
Thank you, Your Worship. I suppose to start with, I've got a couple of questions. Do we have any any idea of the cost of the earthquake strengthening of the Women's Memorial Rest Building?
Through the Mayor, so originally when the first assessment on the building was done, it was assessed at about 14%, and then it was reassessed a bit later, so it came in between 30 and 40% from memory. So the original works that were undertaken to do a building design for as a community space it came in around the 1.5 million, including earthquake strengthening. The work to identify the actual cost of the strengthening itself on its own probably hadn't been done because it was done in conjunction with that wider piece of work. The majority of the issue is with regards to the actual building and the type, and the actual materials that have been used to keep it upright in an earthquake, which is reasonably substantial. So we haven't obviously assessed what that is in isolation, but also not knowing what the future use of the building is going to be required for.
And if we were to, say, get some funding, maybe some would be internal, maybe we could get some externally, what impact would that have on our capacity and deliverability of our team? I'm just worried if we add this in, would we be sacrificing something else or impacting on operational budgets for extra resources?
Through the Mayor, there's probably two sides to that equation. So you've got the capital project itself, which would require project management and staff time to do the work that's required about what the building's going to be used for. So our suggestion would be that a feasibility study would be undertaken to look at that particular piece of work. And then you're potentially looking at the ongoing requirements of the building post any capital work. And so the community services team might like to speak to that further, but it is twofold.
Through the Mayor, just to reiterate, I guess what Adele's said is that the feasibility study, while that could be done externally, will take some staff time around contract management and also input into the engagement and potential partnership opportunities. We would see that the feasibility study would have a look at what the operating options could be going forward, so it may or may not incur additional operating costs for staff to run the facility, for example, depending on what came back from that feasibility study. So that could be revisited once that study was completed.
Okay, so open up for questions from other councillors or any sort of proposition around what we might be looking for here.
Yeah. Could foreshadow a motion if that's what you're looking for.
Recommendation.
Yeah, so I'd recommend that we engage now with Hawke's Bay Historic Places and National Council for Women Hawke's Bay, and then subsequently undertake a feasibility study to define a community use for the space, as well as an appropriate operating model. And that we would look to assign capital budget of, say, 1.5 million in years 2 to 3, where we will be looking to partially fund that through loans, and maybe looking at a third model, or funding partially the rest through external and community funding.
Email it to
Yeah, do you want me to? Hayley's going.
Through you, Madam Mayor, if I may, just subject to us seeking further confirmation in our discussions to date, we have been led to believe that a third might not be able to be achieved, and that'll be more like 50-50. That would need further investigation, but just putting that on the table.
So I would suggest that in order to safeguard the viability of the project going forward, we'd need to include a 50% contribution from ourselves at this stage, and then if that changed and we were able to retain further external funds, we could reduce the budget that we've included. Councillor Taylor.
Just a timing issue in some ways. I understand currently that the building is used to hold library stock. I don't know how much, but until we have an alternative library for that stock to go to, do we create another issue of then having to move that stock again whilst activity takes place at the Women's Memorial Rest building?
Through the Mayor, I could probably answer that. We've managed to increase capacity of book stock in both Taradale and the MTG, so we only have about 11,500 items currently at the Women's Rest, and that's reducing over time as we get rid of what was our stack, so stock that's been with us for more than 10 years. So it's probably more feasible within the next 18 months than it has been previously.
Thank you.
Councillor Mawson and then Councillor Crystal.
Just looking at the viability of part of the solution that was offered to us by the Women's Rest group, and that was the obviously you've got an earthquake prone building in the Women's Rest, and also we've got the library which is earthquake prone. I mean, is there a possibility to stick some of those books back in the library? You've got one building that's worse than the other. I mean, I'm sort of thinking, are they wearing hard hats when they go in there to swap the buildings over or swap the books over?
Through the Mayor, the Women's Rest isn't fully earthquake prone. I think it's at 40% MBS. So you can use that building, but you wouldn't occupy it for staff for use beyond going in and getting stock. Whereas the old library building is about 15% MBS, so you couldn't really go in at all.
Thanks for that clarification. Thank you.
Councillor Crystal.
The Hastings Women's Rest, which they now use, is that run under a trust model? How is that? Yeah. So is that what you're indicating, the same sort of model?
Yeah, the feasibility study would look into operating models.
Yeah. So once they've got a trust set up, obviously they can apply for a lot more funds through different sources.
I think, if I may, one of their major concerns in this post-COVID era is capital projects like this taking away from operational funding. So I think the Heretatonga Women's Centre said that 10% of their budget is secure from Hastings District Council, and the rest is gained through community grants and external funding. So they're really, and it's quite scarce in a post-COVID world. So yeah, yes for the operating. Yeah.
And through you, Madam Mayor, if I could just ask Adele to potentially speak to that in terms of our own context with our ability to deliver if this project was brought into year one of the plan, because we've been trying to do some work on that in the last few hours.
Through the Mayor, so our year one is at our rates cap, which means that we've got very little ability other than taking something out of the plan to accommodate any further costs in that year one. So my recommendation is probably that the feasibility would take place in year two. And then with the capital, with the gateway and decision for council on its way forward, with the proposal for the capital project to flow on from that.
Any further questions or discussion? We'll read out the suggested recommendation.
I'll second it. Yes, I support this resolution. And if it's not able to be done, as quite understandable, this year, then year two, I think, would at least give some surety to those who are really keen to get something done there. And I also think something else we can take into consideration is the fact that Clive Square is not a safe area at the moment. And having a building like this actively inhabited and being utilised might reduce some of the safety concerns that have been expressed from many different directions in this LTP submissions. So, yep, go.
So what we've got on the table is engage with Historic Places Hawke's Bay and National Council of Women Hawke's Bay, and subsequently undertake a feasibility study in year 2 to define a community use for the space as well as an appropriate operating model. Assign a capital budget of 1.5 million in years 2 to 3 with 750,000 funded through loans, and the remainder of, so we only will be budgeting 700.
Just through the Mayor, you need to budget for the entire
cost,
cost,
and then we get the funding coming in.
And note that the residual would come from grants and or other.
Yeah, and the remainder of funding gained through external and community funding. Right. Yes.
Probably for you, Adele. So the 1.5, what does that cover? Is it just the feasibility?
No, through the Mayor, we haven't obviously done any costings or requirements around the building, so that's an initial cost. Initial capital cost only to basically earmark the project subject to the feasibility and an understanding of the future requirements, which will determine, then you go into the detailed design and all the rest of it. So we actually don't know. I mean, we're basing on that on our last costing of it as a community space, but that was at least one LTP ago, so we haven't increased for inflation or any other cost as well. But we're putting a tag against it at 1.5, subject to further work.
Through you, Madam Mayor, potentially there may be some other stakeholders you want to consider naming, given that there has been a high level of interest in terms of safety with Clive Square as well. So, for example, we engage with police on their views about how we can make Clive Square safer as well. So just, if you could just read us again.
So currently it's Historic Places Hawke's Bay and the National Council of Women. We could, rather than starting to list off a whole range.
And other key stakeholders. Yep.
Stuart Nash.
You can speak up.
Exactly.
So, just for my own information, how long is the building being shut for?
Through the Mayor, since 2012.
Just through the Mayor, I'd like to just highlight to Council that we haven't got any funding allocated for a feasibility study. That would be operational expenses, and we're suggesting we would probably need about 50,000. There might be an opportunity to apply through the Lottery Community Facilities Fund or another fund for a feasibility study, but we can't really bank on it at this stage. Right.
Do we need to, and sorry, I was distracted trying to read for the next thing we're moving on to then. So you've highlighted we don't have any funding for the feasibility study. Do we need to tag some funding for that to enable this to move?
Through you, Madam Mayor, there was part of the reasoning as to why we are asking for year 2. Operating funding as well as overall program of work.
Do we need to be specifying an amount at this stage though, or?
Through the Mayor, I would be probably taking something because we're, hitting all these caps at the moment, so it is important to identify exactly what commitments we are making going forward. I also note that there might be some additional resource time required to progress the project and project management time, because it could be, a lot of stakeholders needing to be consulted as well. So I would recommend allocating some further funds on top of the feasibility for operational costs for the project. So Adley, probably $80,000 to $100,000.
Feasibility study and associated resourcing. Right. Nothing further on.
Just
Councillor
one,
Wright.
I'm sorry, you may have covered this. Are there any additional things that we need to be aware of around the sensitivities due to the fact that it's associated as a war memorial? And are there opportunities around funding because of its status?
Just through the Mayor, I think that's a very valid point that we'd need to consider as part of the feasibility study, looking at all of the funding options available to us. And I think one of the submitters talked about the close association with the cenotaph. So that opens up another whole lot of stakeholders that we would need to engage with.
Through you, Madam Chair, related but not directly, and I appreciate the concern over the woman's rest, but there's other properties we have as well, like the Plunkett building in Taradale. Do we have an active list of how we're going to address, or an active approach to how we're going to address some of those other structures?
I believe we do have a list of our seismic impacted buildings, and who does that sit with?
Through the Mayor, it does sit with me within property, and the majority of the work has been done, but we can come back to, I think it's probably not a conversation for today, but we'll come back to Council with more details.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, now moving on here, and I think this was Deputy Mayor Brosnan. There was a submission, there was one in particular, but there were others that did mention it with regards to native planting.
Is this in the management comment?
Yes, yeah.
Have to find the management comment, sorry, Your Worship.
While we do that one, we'll move on to the playground for Southwest Taradale, where we had a management comment indicating that there was a plan in place for that, and I was actually interested to know if this was actually a potential opportunity to apply for some of the Tū Manawa funding for active Aotearoa to actually assist with this particular project.
Did they mention they cover operational rather than capital?
Through the Mayor, they did state that they cover equipment.
Okay.
Play equipment.
Yeah, it's full of it.
However, we would need to investigate that. We haven't applied for a while, but yeah, their website stipulates equipment.
If we just have a recommendation to investigate accessing Tū Manawa active Aotearoa funding for the playground in Southwest Taradale.
Worship, is there any further information about the options? I know there was discussion around Churchill Drive and a variety of reserves in that particular area. Has that been progressed any further?
Yep. One moment, please.
Just swinging into action on that one. Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Just reviewing some correspondence here. There has been some discussion around that, and the thought is around that Churchill Drive area for a playground. There is a gap in our service provision in that area, so there is a bit of thought going into that. That drive specifically has been mentioned, but not finalised.
Found it. I will return back to native planting.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just the comment that I'd put, it was a submission by Brendan White, and he had asked that we avoid colonial-style palms, for instance, in our plantings, and I just had flagged that as a response. As our staff response mentioned that we're trying to increase our native planting, but probably doesn't address the submission, which was, can you avoid certain colonial ones? So I just flagged that one in terms of what our response is to avoiding those ones. If staff could just look at that in the response.
Could you perhaps, perhaps
Plant right place.
provide that feedback directly?
Yeah, I'm just actually not sure what our staff's position is on avoiding colonial. That's why I didn't provide wording, sorry, at the time, is I'm not sure if we are, for instance, not planting. Because I know Phoenix palms, for instance, along the new stretches of Prebenson Drive, we have those Phoenix palms, which I know have a significant cost to us to maintain as they get taller. It costs $100,000 a year just to cut the ones down Kennedy Road. So I wasn't sure how to answer that one, but I was aware the answer didn't address the submission.
Through you, Madam Mayor, certainly we are looking to remove some of the more juvenile palms down the western end of Prebenson Drive, and that is programmed to occur once the plantings that we're putting in place now have matured somewhat. But certainly looking to move away from that practice.
Perfect. I think John's got some great wording there in response to that submission.
You can leave it to the team to get on with that.
Oh dear.
Not palm it off to someone else.
Richard won that. Have to turn your mic off. I just wanted to ask a question. I think this is great, but what about something like jacarandas? Are they considered to be colonial plantings? Are we talking about non-native plantings? Is that what's meant by colonial plantings, do you think? Through you, Madam Mayor. Annette, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, the submission was, I'd like council to invest more in native plantings rather than colonial style palms, pines and grasses. More natives and parks would be appreciated, and to avoid those other ones. I mean, to me, I'm happy to leave it in an operational space around which plants are best where, but had just flagged that submission as needing a bit of...
Yeah, again, through the chair, we employ some fairly qualified people, and right plant, right place. The environment that we're planting to is not necessarily the environment that was around 200 years ago. If you're planting on roads or old seabeds, sometimes natives aren't necessarily the best option. So, right plant, right place.
Richard.
Just that John can provide some further wording.
Okay, flagging next, there was a submission regarding the dog control bylaw and a call for some stricter controls within that. Currently, that bylaw is not due to be reviewed until 2024, and just flagging that I would be very keen to see that happen sooner, and seeking the views of councillors.
Just through you, Your Worship, I think Richard yesterday in the mixed of other things mentioned that they were planning to bring that forward to year one. Just seeking clarification maybe on that from the Chief.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, we are looking at bringing the animal control bylaw forward, and officers have started to work on that already. I think what some of the submitters have provided with respect to regional park as well as safety have given us some really good food for thought for that as well. So yes, that motion works.
We've got some numbers coming back to us at some stage, haven't we? So they're not pretty numbers either. No.
Timing, Richard. 2021. Year one.
Yeah. Go.
No. No.
D comes before F.
Bouncing around a bit here, sorry, but the next one on my list was with regards to the Sports Hawke's Bay submission and the request for perhaps some additional support from Council for the iWay training program, which they indicated would be additional financial support. I was interested to know what we currently have in the budget to support that program.
It's nothing, eh?
Not for that particular program for the Mayor. We are proposing to increase their service agreement to $40,000 a year from their current $25,000 a year to accommodate some extra project work which we haven't defined with them yet, but that particular program is not included.
Through you, Madam Mayor, just for consideration, we have been working initially with Sports Hawke's Bay about a slightly amended version of iWay with respect to scooters, and working in collaboration with Baysgate to deliver a similar program. So we have had some discussions, not specific to cycles, but just bearing in mind that a lot of our children do scoot, and that they're slightly more affordable and easy to be stored. So we have had those discussions with them, leveraging off some of our commercial partners that are within your portfolio.
And so that we would be looking to deliver that program ourselves through Baysgate and our staff there?
In partnership with Sports Hawke's Bay.
Would that open an opportunity for us to access Te Manawai funding too?
That is the thinking at the moment. With respect to our ability to leverage into some sponsorship as well through Baysgate, but leveraging into the Te Manawai Fund with a safety and play lens. As I said, this is in its infancy, and it is a program that, while being similar, does not deliver on the iWay skills, obviously. So similar, but potentially their request could be viewed separately.
Do we need to include anything if this is actually some program of work that's already being investigated, and there's not, correct me if I'm wrong, a requirement for us to provide any funding for it? Do we need to include any recommendation within the long-term plan deliberations?
Sorry, Madam Mayor, can I just seek clarification for iWay or for the scooter program?
The scooter program.
It's just for context.
I know there's been several submissions from different parts of the city about requests for community plans, and I know that is something that a number of councillors have been requesting for the awards for quite some time now, and again recognising our funding and resourcing constraints, but I did want to raise it for conversation so that councillors could have an opportunity to put forward their views on the development of community plans throughout our city. Councillor Bogue.
I think for Piramai, it has been discussed, and there was some agreement, just informal agreement, that Piramai South, is it? Piramai would be one of the first places to have a community plan, along with Taradale, I think. And I just wondered if there's been any progress as far as those are concerned, just to sort of kick this whole process off. If I could ask through you, Madam Mayor, if I could ask staff if there's been any start made to these.
Through the Mayor, another fatality, if you like, from our year last year, 2020, when we were in the midst of responding to civil defence emergencies, as you're very well aware. However, we have just completed our work program for next year, which we'll confirm in the next week or so, and Piramai is considered to be a top priority for our community plans. We would like to finalise a framework for those plans before commencing with a particular community, but I think it's fair to say that working with the Willing and Piramai Residents Association have led the charge with us around wanting to develop a community plan. They are our number one at this stage. I think we do need to consider the level at which community plans are developed. We've been doing a bit of thinking around whether Taradale is too big in terms of doing a suburban community plan, but that's something we need to do a bit more thinking on. As you're all well aware, people get very interested in what happens in their local areas, and when you are able to work at that level with people, you get a lot more buy-in around participating and continuing those plans and having them be sustainable. So we've got a little bit more work to do, but I'd just like to assure the council that we do have it as a priority for our work going forward.
I'm just, would a community plan be what John McGifford spoke about yesterday for West Shore? Is that a community plan?
Through the Mayor, I think the community plans come in like various sizes and forms, and sometimes they are a collection of activities. So I think it is very dependent on the community itself in terms of what it wants to achieve and how it wants to go about that. So I guess the answer is yes, it can be.
So they're a very active group, and if Taradale's too big, probably West Shore's ideal. Take that, Nigel.
Taradale's never too big, but I think on that point, I think the issue we have with the likes of Taradale is its rapid growth, the infrastructural issues. I think Taradale actually needs a master plan rather than a community plan.
Through the Mayor, I'd agree that it does require a lot more of a cross-council planning approach to a suburb the size of Taradale.
And please, could we put Maraenui on the list?
Through the Mayor, yes, I think everybody has a priority, and of course we want to establish some criteria around how we might prioritise, and some of that is down to whether the community wants to develop a community plan. So, and we have had a number of community plans in some areas, maybe not called a community plan. So there may be some opportunity to review some situations.
So I guess flagging that we actually need to put in place a framework initially with regards to what a community plan is, and then work towards a prioritisation process, and that's the first step. Yeah.
Good.
And through you, Madam Mayor, I would support using the language frameworks, so that allows a lot of flexibility between what each community needs. I will make the point that to do these well and to create the grassroots buy-in that you need, it is an awful lot of work, and not suggesting that it's not a very valid thing to spend our time on. They can be particularly labour intensive, and then being able to assess and track and plan for what the community wants is something that would have to feed into the next long-term plan process as well. So the framework would be good Mayor-wise, in the sense of allowing flexibility from community to community and a prioritisation function or tool.
And could I, if you don't mind me interrupting, suggest that the ward councillors for that particular area be very actively involved too, because we can do some of the footwork.
I'm going to just raise one more, which is just in relation to the grey power submission and the rates rebate, which of course currently is a central government mechanism, and the request to lobby around that rates rebate policy being reviewed with a view to the thresholds being increased. And so really I'd just like to suggest that we do advocate on behalf of our superannuitants and the grey power membership to central government for a review of the rates rebate policy.
I can't say anything, but
I would support that.
Anyone that's 65 or over you've got a conflict.
I'm obviously not over 65, but anyway, I actually see that on a very practical level when we have a number of residents in retirement villages who come and seek to do that, seek that rebate, and to speak to them, and when we see that there's 2 superannuants living within a retirement villa, they don't qualify, and it's actually quite disheartening for them. And you know, cynically, it appears the level has been set to actually keep people out of receiving the rebate. So I would fully support advocating for that.
Councillor Crystal.
As the under 65, I totally support it too. And with the benefit rises that they've just got, sorry, my cold's getting worse and worse during the day, it will even take them further away. So I totally support that as
get
well.
Benefit increases.
Eh?
You're not getting the $10 a week or anything.
Every year.
Yeah.
That's true.
Sorry, I said that was the last, but I've just found on another piece of my paper. It's another advocacy one. This was on behalf of West Shore residents to advocate to Unison re the undergrounding of their power lines.
Could we extend that? There's a couple of other areas. I'm conscious in Piramai, particularly in the Onekawa Tamatea ward. I think it's Exeter, and there's a couple really standout, obscure residential streets where it looks like over undergrounding of overhead lines has happened kind of around them, and there's a couple of streets. I'm just wondering if we could extend that to maybe some of the more obvious ones.
Can I just highlight that I've had a few requests from people in Taradale about the same issue.
So perhaps if we, those people, councillors who have been approached by residents, could just feed in offline to include in the correspondence that we have with Unison with a list of the areas we would like them to look at.
Cool.
Through you, Madam Mayor,
sorry.
Can I just seek some clarification? Sorry to put you on the spot, Adele, but did Waka Kotahi or maybe John remove the funding for footpaths? Sorry, whoever I've put on the spot, Robin. Yeah. Underground. It's just advocate, but we can't
might not be able to replace the footpath.
Yeah.
Through you, Worship, the Wakatati reduced interim approval amount didn't explicitly state footpaths. When we were trying to illustrate what the impact could be, is actually equivalent to our entire footpath renewal programme. So that's where the footpath conversation came. So it would have to be cut from various renewals programmes.
Thank you.
So I guess we're just needing to recognise that if Unison decided that they were of a mind to underground these power lines, we may struggle to actually replace the footpath.
Well, one thing that hasn't been mentioned, and it's probably just worth mentioning now through the Mayor, is that the work that has been undertaken in advocating with central government around the funding for the year has been cut, as Steph mentioned either today or yesterday. And so at the moment we're at risk of $250,000 worth of income that we would normally get through central government for some of our projects, and so that cost may be borne back on us, and so it is a risk going into next year of $250,000.
So based on that, through you, Madam Mayor, I'll just continue with the advocacy, but we need a strong relationship with Unison so that we can ensure our own work program is in order.
And through you, Your Worship, perhaps our advocacy could focus on getting a plan and a time frame rather than, say, a year 2 commitment or something like that specifically, and then we can, budget accordingly in our future planning.
Just bearing in mind that a submission was made from West Shore in relation to the power lines and footpath. So, I mean, we do have to answer that. Thank you.
That's part of the thinking. We need to get smart when we're working with other organisations, that perhaps if we're looking at Unison, we pick an area that's got the oldest paths, not the newest paths. And West Shore might be a good option.
Thank you, Councillor.
And thank you for letting me seek that clarification. I do think I've confused a couple of issues there, but just the overall funding we have for through Waka Kotahi for things like footpath renewals is reduced significantly. So I think it is the point about having the good communication and understanding where they're going and timing our works accordingly.
Just to,
Councillor
so is this starting to fall into that community? We talked about, you know, a community plan. So does this start to fall into part of that?
Ideally it would. So ideally, as in my view, as you are heading into your long-term plan deliberations, you would have all of our community plans lining up with all of their needs and the ability to adjust work programs accordingly. And that could be something we can aim for, but at this stage we have some questions over our ability to deliver community plans, and but we can keep addressing the needs and delivering the services in the meantime.
Yeah.
Actually, I might even redirect this one through to John. John just came up with some new information that's probably important for this discussion as well, around the underground costs and who bears what.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. Historically, undergrounding of overhead power lines has been a cost share between the utility provider and council. So generally a 50-50 cost share. So that would need to be considered if we're asking Unison to fund.
So we have included in the recommendation noting this needs to align with the program, not our, we've said for footpath renewals, but just our work program and budgeting.
So perhaps a bit of further clarification then. I don't think we've got any funding set aside for undergrounding power lines.
Can't really advocate for something if we have no budget to pay for our portion of the costs.
Is that an issue in itself that our, sorry through you, Your Worship, that over the next 10 years we have no budget set aside for urban undergrounding of cables? Would we usually?
I guess you've got to charge somebody. With new development, it's upon the developer to underground. Where they might be developing the road frontage.
Yeah, sorry, existing overhead lines.
Yeah, existing. I don't know the history behind why we've not in recent times funded undergrounding. I believe there is some, but I'm not aware of it. Is it an issue for those that want underground? Yes. Are we able to fund it? That's the big question, isn't it? It's about priorities.
Go with Councillor Mawson, because you've been looking at me for quite some time, and then Councillor Tapani.
Thank you. I'd quite like to see underground power lines, but the reality is I know that Unison has done a bit of work in Onikawa replacing their power poles, and also Chorus utilise their power poles as well for their phone lines and fibre and so forth as well. So probably lovely stuff to be talking about, but as I say, as you've said, not funded, and yeah, they have actually done some power pole replacements, so I think would be quite reluctant to be doing that. But however, I'm all for it. It's what everyone else wants, and we've got the money.
We haven't got the money.
Haven't got, yeah.
Just a question to staff through you, Your Worship. When will be the next opportunity for us to have a workshop and get a better understanding of well, particularly where Unison's assets mix with our infrastructure and assets and what our future options are? It occurs to me that the poles and the cables belong to Unison.
Through you, Madam Mayor, certainly we do have some street lights located on power poles, and that creates an interface that we need to work with them on. And certainly undergrounding power lines does put a requirement potentially on telecom as well. We do have very busy underground corridors for all utilities, and so just underground a power cable may actually require it to go on the road carriageway as opposed to under a footpath. Until you get to that street, you really just don't know. That'll have an implication on cost as well. Yeah, look, that's a pretty broad topic there. I think maybe that's something to take offline and tease out what you're really looking for there, because I can't really give you a more clear an answer than that right now.
Councillor Brown.
I'm just conscious that a lot of our light poles are needing urgent replacement. Do we have any indication if Unisons are in a similar state?
I think that would be
Through you,
best
Worship.
to take,
Going a bit off topic.
So
Yeah.
They're primarily concrete or timber. So.
So, bearing in light of the fact we do not have any funding ourselves allocated for the undergrounding of any power lines, I wouldn't be comfortable that we advocate to Unison for this. Councillor Wright.
Therefore, if that's where we're heading, could we just not make a resolution that any time we are doing any major works on a road that currently has above ground power lines, that we contact Unison and try and work with them at that point to underground?
Yep.
Just, if I may, Your Worship, that is current practice.
Okay.
So at the moment, Ericsson Road, for instance, we're seeing new underground power cables. And the district plan protects council's area from any new overground power. So if there's any new networks, any new services, they then have to go underground, and the existing overground also has to come with it. So we do have some provisions. We don't have a great deal of leverage for the existing stuff though.
Excellent. So I'm going to remove the recommendation around that advocacy role, and I'd now like to open up to councillors if there's any items that you would like to put on the table for discussion. Deputy Mayor Brosnan.
Like you, Your Worship, I had a small list. We've worked through a number of them. Reasonably quickly, I note in the officers' responses we refer in the civic precinct space to Ahuriri Aotea, just requesting that be changed. That was a bit of a draft name that hasn't been adopted, and I'd hate for that to get into some formal responses yet. So just flagging that. Ahuriri Aotea. If we can just call that the civic and library area for now. Aotea, A-T-E-A. I thought it was worth responding to the request from the Friends of the Library with regard to the funding for the currently 2 funded from central government holiday program roles. Oh, I think they had 2 requests, sorry, two staff members who are currently funded through government, and then the holiday funding, and just wondered if we could get an understanding of what staff's response to those 2 requests are.
For you, Madam Mayor, we're having a council workshop on the 15th of September to talk about the library partnership roles and the successes so far, to give you a better understanding of what they do and if that central government funding will continue.
So you're comfortable with the budgeting that we have in the draft LTP, Darren?
Yes.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, just moving through quickly, I'm conscious of time. There was a question raised by our sustainable energy submission around whether our district plan is proposing to make renewable energy a permitted activity. Could we get some clarity from staff on that issue, please?
The renewable energy is still required to comply with bulk and location kind of rules. So it's not the activity is fine. It's more just how it comes and how it's constructed, and it still have to comply with the height and side yard rules and those sorts of things.
Yeah, perfect, thank you. So I think in short that's a yes, it can be a permitted activity provided it complies with other criteria in the district plan. Nothing required from that. There were a number of submissions that were in relation to the waste, council's waste activities, and I just wonder if perhaps we could receive a report on the WMMP implementation as an outcome from all those various submissions, so that council has some visibility over the actions we are taking. A number of the issues raised by submitters are in our WMMP, and I just thought it would be helpful if council, say, annually received a specific report on our implementation of the WMMP, and that we could tell submitters that will increase visibility over our implementation work. Nods, cool. A couple of submissions raised, I suppose, the cultural benefit in telling our stories of mana whenua in the CBD. I know at a couple of annual plan, long-term plans, we've talked about telling that story along Marine Parade, and I remember we talked about it as part of the initial development, and I just wonder, is that something that's still on our radar? Possibly community services or planning, not sure.
Sorry, I'm still working on through the chair, Mayor, Madam. Apologies. The short answer to that is yes, and I think it would be something we could take offline, and it is a collaboration, obviously, of community services and Te Waka Rangipu going forward. As councillors will be aware, that Te Waka Rangipu team will grow substantially in size by the end of this month, so part of it is about relooking at the workload between those teams.
Thank you, Steph.
Supplementary? So would also like to see, as that work grows and evolves, how we might be able to create and work in opportunities with the developing regional park idea. Given that it's a clean space, we could almost narrate any story that's worth narrating.
Thank you. Moving quickly through, the other one was a request for a code of conduct for bikes on cycleways, and could I suggest that we do that? Put together I think the code of conduct wording was Councillor Simpson's during that submission, and I thought that was a good idea, and that we should look to develop a code of conduct and potentially signage or however that best be implemented.
Councillor Taylor and Councillor Mawson wishing to speak to that?
I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel, that the code of conduct has already been implemented. Obviously needs greater advertising, but there are a number of agencies through Sport Hawke's Bay, through the Regional Council and Vicky Butterworth, where that information is available, and some of the code is quite visible on the pathways that keep left, and other bits and pieces. So I think it's already there. It just needs to be populated.
Yeah, through the Mayor, I do agree with Councillor Taylor, but I mean also you've just got to look around, and I would dare say that 50% of people are not actually wearing a helmet. And how long has that been lawful? Actual law. So I do agree that it's probably an education thing, but I think overall it doesn't seem to be working much.
So we will just made a note that we will undertake to promote the existing codes of conduct. Yep.
And work with Sports Hawke's Bay.
That sounds good. Question from me, moving on to the submission from Hawke's Bay Regional Council regarding the unblocking of our trade waste pipe, and was just looking for some certainty on timeframes of that in our current programming from staff and the LTP.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I believe that's in our program for the first year of the LTP. There is some work to do in that around the chemistry of waste, and also consideration of pre-treatment at either end or on private property. So still a bit to unpick there.
Thank you. I only have two others. One was in regards to bylaws. Two aspects of that. One was a request for, I suppose, more transparency around breaches of bylaws, in particular the stormwater bylaw. And I was interested if we're able to do that. And the second question on bylaws was around how we deal with dilapidated buildings in our CBDs and whether we have any tools in our toolbox to deal with those.
Through the Mayor, John, I'm just conscious you might not have been here for those submissions, but with respect to the first point, there are a lot of comparisons between us and Hawke's Bay Regional Council in terms of what we can charge, and also sort of naming of potential breaches. So if you could help put that into context as well, some of the differences. Sorry, for those listening online, I think it's important to make some distinction between what we can and can't do.
I'll give it my best shot. A note, Cameron Burton's probably our resident expert on this, and he's not here today. We could probably dial in, but I'll give it a shot. Our bylaw is a function of the Local Government Act, and that limits what we can fine up to $20,000, whereas Hawke's Bay Regional Council fines underneath the RMA, and that has a much higher limit with regard to what they can fine or prosecute to. From memory, that's about $600,000. So we are perhaps for the first time partnering up on our review of discharges to stormwater, our open waterways and so on and so forth. With regards to some recent events where HBRC might take the lead on that potentially, and therefore enable a higher level of cost to be brought to bear in that regard. But there are some very distinct differences there, and I believe will always be limited by with regard to what we can find with regard to our bylaw due to that legislative mechanism. Does that answer the question?
Thank you. I think that's valuable information. I understood that difference. The question from the submitter was around transparency on prosecutions and action against illegal discharges.
Through you, Madam Mayor, thanks for that clarification. We need to be very, very careful as we proceed through investigations on alleged breaches. They are not confirmed breaches until it's been through a court of law and confirmed through that judgment. And I'm sure the last thing that any council officer or member of the public would like to see is that potential prosecution prejudiced against because information is made public. So our ability to be fully transparent in that regard is difficult so as not to compromise any proceeding.
Yeah, sorry, I think the issue raised by the submitter, and I appreciate, John, you weren't here to hear that, was that Regional Council publicly acknowledge when they are taking a prosecution. We possibly don't, and so there's a difference in the transparency of those two processes there, and I understand what you're saying in terms of prejudicing that process, but why is it that one agency can do it and the other cannot?
And again, through the Mayor, the reason that I thought that the first part of the conversation was relevant is because it's the number of prosecutions which can be taken if our recovery level is $20,000 and Hawke's Bay Regional Council have the ability to recover around that $500,000. I'm not sure of the figures on my feet. Then it naturally flows that their ability to pursue more prosecutions follows. Now, I might be wrong, we might need to take this offline, but my understanding is that HBRC notifies when they lodge in court, which of course is when it becomes public, whereas our potential prosecutions, given our cost recovery, some of them may be done through HBRC, as John's alluded to, but you will not see the same level of potential breaches making it to court, given the different legislations that we're operating under. Hope that clarifies to a degree.
And through you, Madam Mayor, if I might just clarify, our stormwater bylaw is pretty new still, so our practices around prosecutions under that bylaw are absolutely at the starting gates in terms of maturity in that process. So if there are learnings that we can take away from the way that HBRC undertake their prosecutions and how they provide transparency around those prosecutions, then we're absolutely all for finding those learnings and implementing those learnings. But the recent prosecutions that we're or potential prosecutions that we're investigating now are our first. So no doubt there'll be better ways to do things as we move forward, and absolutely we'll look for those.
And if I may have one further comment, I would hate for anybody listening online to be thinking that we don't take these matters seriously. And one of our first sessions, you as a council did instruct the need for regulatory framework in prosecutions. It's just that, as John's mentioned, some of our bylaws are new, but also there may be more avenue to prosecute through HBRC, so it's us working with them as well.
Thank you. I think that's good context. Through you, Madam Mayor, my last thing on my list to address through submissions was a number of submissions around specific stormwater issues. So we had the Harold Holt request for a pump come through into the cross-country drain. We had the North Street presentation of the gully on the hill, and a number of other stormwater related concerns in the written submission. And I'm just wondering if we could formulate as a council possibly a way to get an understanding of how those works are being prioritised, sort of just opening that up for discussion. I suppose I don't have a proposed way forward, but understand that was a key concern.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, I think subject to the finalisation and final adoption of this long-term plan, there's obviously quite a huge capital program in there with respect to all of our waters. So potentially as we finalise this plan and get it through final audit, after that is a really good opportunity to work through prioritisation and workshop that together. I'm not sure if I have actually answered your question though, but specific to whether it be a pump on Harold Holt or whatever it is, there's a huge capital program which you're looking to adopt. Need to just work through that final audit and then come back and talk about how things that sit outside those major capital works get prioritised in line with those capital works.
Yeah, through you, Your Worship, from my perspective, I don't want to sit here talking about specific, roading designs, but I think if the resolution of the LTP is that prioritisation work will be done in conjunction with councillors after adoption of the overall budgeting, then I'm quite happy with that.
And if I may, through the Mayor, to the Deputy Mayor, I'm not sure we did answer your question about buildings.
No.
So could you ask it again? Was it about enforcement, wasn't it?
Yeah, so it was around what tools we may have in our toolbox, whether that be bylaws or district plans to address some dilapidated buildings that we have primarily around the CBD. I think the Minister raised that in his submission.
Through the Mayor, the threshold really is safe and unsanitary, and that is it's a kind of quite a I guess it's quite a high threshold before you can do something about a particular private residence. So you basically have to, it has to be, to an unhygienic level really, where you might have vermin and those sorts of things involved before there can be action taken. And I think the corresponding part is that it's quite difficult if you don't have those kind of high threshold tests not to get judgmental or difficult, I guess. When it's become untidy enough and dilapidated enough for action to be taken. So it's a very complex area without impinging on people's personal rights. Currently, we do nothing different than any other authority in the country around that. It's very difficult to have a bylaw for that very reason. It's to impose a threshold that is more than safe or unhygienic is going to be very difficult.
2 follow-up questions through you, Madam Mayor. Do we currently have any investigations in that unsafe and what was the other word you used? Unsanitary, unsafe and unsanitary space. Are there any current investigations? And then the second question I have is, could we define, in terms of an internal practice note or something, what we consider to be unsafe and unsanitary, as it is quite a broad term, and I'm sure there's some case law around that as well.
I don't have that.
Sorry. Just through you, Madam Mayor, probably be reluctant to answer that first question. But to the second point, back to you, Richard.
I don't have that information at the moment, and I think possibly there is guidelines around that, but I'd have to come back to you.
Isn't it?
Brosnan out. Master of motions. Councillor Taylor.
Could I just make a comment, going back to one of Deputy Mayor Brosnan's points, and the capital plan around the stormwater issues that we had in November? There is considerable concern in Napier South and some of those areas as to what we are planning to do to overcome another issue if that was to occur. And I know we've got a massive capital plan and all of those things, but I think it would be really important once this is signed off and we prioritise that we actually tell the community what is planned, because there are many there sitting thinking we're moving into the worst months of the year, and Christchurch has just had a downpour. We had one on November the 9th. What are we doing to prevent that from happening? So let our community know what our plans are.
So I have put through an action in here to actually have that prioritisation workshop involving councillors post-adoption of the plan. So we can add on to that. That information will then be shared with the community around the stormwater planning projects planned over the term of the long term. Anything further that any councillors can? Oh, crikey. I'm going to go in order of this way. Councillor Price, then Councillor Taylor, then Councillor McGrath.
Mine, very simple. Review of the freedom camping.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I've asked a couple of times. And LTP time is D-Day.
Chief Executive may like to provide you with an update of that.
Did you know I was going to ask this?
No. With respect to any particular area or
well,
has there been any area that we get a high volume of complaints about?
Well, the submissions were from West Shore, and Hayley and I get a lot of feedback. I'd say grief, but a lot of feedback on it. And there's not many parks, and it causes more hassle than they're worth.
So through you, Madam Mayor, I think given that there is community harm and community grief that has been brought to your attention and our attention, that it is legitimate for me to review West Shore in particular and see if it is within my delegations to temporarily suspend camping at that site.
Got no further questions.
Your Honour. Councillor Taylor.
I'd just like to raise the issue that we received a number of, in other matters or other issues raised by submitters, they talked about the Napier Aquatic Centre, and our council officers or the management comments were around the contamination report. I would like to see that, and I understand that it's in its last stage of clarification, that once that has been completed, that report is made public as soon as possible, because there are a number of submitters that raise that matter as what are we doing and where are we going with that project, and I think that that report needs to be made public ASAP.
Through the Mayor, I do have a note from Mr Lucas, the Sport and Recreation Manager, that the finalised Tonkin and Taylor report should be with us by the end of June. It's just going through a final reiterations, and then it will formally come to council by Glenn Lucas. So that will be probably in the next couple of meeting schedules.
Supplementary, if I may. So I'm cognizant of the fact that those houses that are built in that vicinity will be to some degree aware of the contamination beneath that soil, but I'd also like the opportunity for them to be at least notified that it will be made public and given the opportunity to have a precursor of that in case there are impacts that they're not aware of and any liabilities that may be reflected as a result of that. Is there value in that suggestion? What I'm saying is, can we make sure that that's particularly informed, that the residents who are directly impacted by this report are specifically notified that it will be made public when it's made public?
Can I seek clarification on which residents you believe are directly affected? Because this is the Onikawa Park report only.
It is, but I think we need to acknowledge the fact that there will be community members that live in the surrounding properties there who will have concerns about whether any of that potential contamination also impacts their properties. And we do know that council has been taken to court in the past on this matter, so it's a live matter for some of our residents, and I think we do need to be cognizant of that if we're going to be making any sort of report on contamination in that area public.
Can I suggest through you, Madam Mayor, that we talk about interested parties or localised interested parties not impacted necessarily? Yeah. But limiting it to the neighbourhood so it's not all interested parties. So if we could have some wording around that.
There has been reports in the past from the regional council released as well, so it's probably not new information.
And through you, Madam Mayor, in fact, the tests that were undertaken, the physical tests that were undertaken were only undertaken within reserve, so we have no new information on private property.
So I think it's just acknowledging that rather than them reading about it in the newspaper, letting them know that this report is due to be released.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point, and that's where Steph's point about interested as opposed to impacted, is we can't inform to that level.
Interested residents within the vicinity of the Onikawa Park Reserve.
No, it's all right. My only caveat is I think everyone's interested.
Yeah. That's what needs to be surrounding, or some words to that effect.
Councillor McGrath.
Yeah, the one I'd like to bring up is with regards to central football and the artificial turf that was in the master plan from 2013, and now a decision's been made to remove that without consultation. And I'm just thinking we actually have to progress Napier. It was in a plan for a reason. There's a need. The football numbers are increasing, and I just think we need to continue on providing facilities in Napier, and specifically at this park, and for our residents.
So I just want to seek some clarification on a couple of points there. If there's anyone here that can answer them. Firstly, was there a budget included in the long-term plan that has been removed, or was it just that it was in the Park Island Master Plan, which is a separate document? Secondly, if there was a budget, how much was it?
Apologies, I did tell Adele that she could stand down, that the dollars discussion had ended, but we may just need to take a moment unless anybody's got that at their fingertips.
Oh, happy to kick that one around. It's probably worth putting some context on that through Madam Mayor with regard to artificial turfs for hockey. They pay mostly for their own turf, where council do provide some contribution to that. I believe that in the Park Island Master Plan there were a number of precincts identified, and in the southern precinct artificial turf was identified for football, and that's still in there. It's just not funded within the long-term plan timeframe.
So from memory, I think we contributed 500,000 to the hockey turf. Does anyone else? Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. And I don't think there's an expectation from Central Football for us to fund the whole cost. So I guess if we are here looking to discuss a contribution towards that, it would be fair and equitable that we would consider the same contribution we made to hockey, because that's only just been in the last few years. So putting a potential $500,000 contribution on the table. Councillor McGrath and Councillor Simpson.
So, well, would that be the same for all sporting codes and all sports grounds? Will they be expected to pay 50% or a portion in the future when they wish to use grounds or halls or various bits and pieces? Because the hockey was an unusual precedent at the time that they had to pay for their or half of their turf.
In what regard was it an unusual precedent?
Well, for the likes of the swim club, we didn't ask them to pay half the pool or have any input.
I think it's slightly different in that the swimming pool was available to the whole of the community, not just to the swim club, whereas these turfs are predominantly, if not completely, used by these sporting organisations and not available for the wider public use. Would be my understanding. Sorry.
Apologies. Just was going to say there's a couple of numbers to have a look at here. So if we did get to a point where you wanted to move on to the next and come back to this, that would be helpful. Take a few minutes.
I think we've got a few questions in between time. Or, yeah, so we'll. Councillor Simpson.
Yeah, I think just further to Councillor McGrath's point, the point Central Football were making above more than anything else was about the timing, so that they had time to organise their fundraising campaigns, and they had uncertainty over when the plan was to do the turf. So I think that was probably more the primary issue for them, was when do we plan to do it, if we are going to do it, and so that they can then gear their systems up to meet their part of the funding arrangements. So I think that was sort of the element that they indicated was missing in the current scheme.
And I have a slightly different recollection. Absolutely agree on the timing, but I think there was also a very clear expectation that council make a contribution to the cost as well, because that would also assist them with developing their fundraising strategy if they knew what they already had.
Correct. They know what the target was.
Yeah. Councillor Brown.
I took a note that they asked for what the cost would be, so that they knew what that shortfall would be, so that they...
And I would see that would be for them to establish in terms of if they would take the lead on the project and we would contribute towards it. But so in our response to them, we can indicate that it would be their responsibility to seek quotes, and then we give them an indication of what, if any, funding we're prepared to contribute, and give an indication of the timing that sits within our long-term plan.
So that would mean we wouldn't be constructing it?
No.
That's not us.
We'd just be potentially giving them some money.
And just through the Mayor, so we've just gone and had a review of what was considered as part of the long-term plan and pulling the plan together. There was some cuts to budgets due to our constraints around our loans and borrowings this particular round. And so there was 2 parcels that were removed from the long-term plan. One was the Park Island Southern redevelopment at 11.4 million, and the Park Island Northern development 4.7 million. And so as part of the Southern redevelopment, there were some funds in there for some of those soccer field developments.
So, and they've approached us now for something, I think, quite specific. I don't think we need to drill down any further into those wider budget allocations and those being removed from the long-term plan. But I would like us to consider now the potential of putting back into the long-term plan 500,000 as a contribution to Central Football, developing or putting in an artificial turf, and then seek some guidance from council officers as to when would be the best timing for that, and how that could be funded. And I guess as part of that, this sort of will link back into our funding request conversation, where we currently have on the table a potential $1 million to the regional sports park, and we've also put into that funding request pot the 500,000 for the Women's Memorial Rest. So if we put all 3 in, we'd be looking at an additional $2 million worth of funding outgoing. Oh, 750,000. Thank you, Councillor Brown. Okay, while we wait for council officers, Councillor Brown and then Councillor Crown with a couple of more other items.
One of our submitters spoke about our GIS systems and how there were some inaccuracies in that. And I was just wondering if there was any work program scheduled to update our maps and property data.
Through you, Madam Mayor, sorry, Councillor Brown, it'll just take me a bit to pull that up, unless, Richard, you had an answer.
Could you please repeat the question?
In terms of GIS systems or GIS maps, is there any work program scheduled to update our maps and property data?
Sorry, I found my answer. Oh, no, I've found my answer. Well, Adele's busy. So when the new LiDAR data maps that we're undertaking as a Hawke's Bay regional project is delivered, then I think that's mid-October, then we expect there to be an improvement in the quality of that data. Thanks for that, Richard. No.
And another submitter introduced the idea of purple pipes, where we recycle, he said wastewater, but I'm assuming that means like grey water, yeah. So showers and sinks and stormwater for gardening use. And I was just wondering if the district plan made any comment on that.
I don't think it does, but I'd have to go and check with you. Again, it's the grey water facilities are something that's kind of regulated through the Building Act, and so how those two things knit together, and the district plan tends to regulate activity, doesn't tend to say to promote, if you know what I mean. So I doubt whether it makes specific mention, but I will check for you.
Could I add something further to that discussion? I was interested in that purple pipes conversation, and I think the context behind that was around being more water conscious and using our water in a more sustainable fashion. The tools I believe we are looking at in the district plan are around on-site storage of rainwater as a requirement, and also the requirement to treat stormwater on-site before it hits our network, both of which I think achieve some of the outcomes that the purple pipes kind of conversation was, without needing to obviously replumb the city to introduce a different style of network as well.
Just to further that's really around being able to cope with inundation and things like that, so to be able to have detention of the stormwater.
Yeah, I think just further to that, I think the purple pipe scenario is actually about an on-site issue. It's not about a district network. And it has been around for a long time. So new builds have, in some cases, incorporated grey water separation and then storage and pumping as you would a septic tank sort of arrangement. So there is actually an on-site infrastructure cost involved. And it's sometimes right back to the planning stage. So new builds, it could probably be done quite easily. For existing homes, it requires a bit of replumbing.
And that's you done, Councillor Brown? Okay, Councillor Crown.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We heard from a number of submitters around one of the challenges that we currently face, and with a heightened commitment to making sure that we're engaging and consulting with mana whenua, we have copped a bit of criticism as to how we're doing with that. So I wanted to discuss whether we would be comfortable with stating that this is a priority for us, and that we are looking to establish an agreed process for mana whenua contribution, which needs to start with Te Tai Whenua o Te Whanganui a Orotu as the mandated mana whenua organisation, and include the other parties as well. But I do agree with their call to be recognised in that way. And I was curious around the management comment about the MOU that we have with them. If someone could give me some details.
So yes, we do have a draft MOU with Te Tai Whenua, which Council has funded the cost of the development of that, but have worked in partnership with Tai Whenua, taking the lead to ensure that it is truly reflecting the way that they would like to work in partnership with Council. That draft MOU is currently with the board of Te Tai Whenua, and we are awaiting further contact from them to progress that and finalise it. So with regards to you requesting us to make the ongoing engagement and relationship with iwi and mana whenua, and in particular Te Tai Whenua, I'm very, very happy to make that a priority, and note that within the long-term plan document.
And through you, Madam Mayor, there's a responsibility for me now that I'm in the chair to follow up with the Chief Executive of Te Tai Whenua and progress that MOU, as well as the other points that you have made.
Okay, so just heading back to Central Football Artificial Turf, just doing a...
Thank you. Through the Mayor, just working with the finance team now, and we're of the view that there would be capability to include that in year 3. It would need to be loan funded, and we would like to develop a program of works around it with respect to the other facilities that may be required and or upgraded at that time, toilet blocks, etc. That should allow time for their fundraising as well.
That's right, yeah. And also bearing in mind, I'm assuming this is based on if we did also proceed with the regional sports park funding of $1 million. So there could potentially be room to move this forward if we opted not to do some of the other funding that we're currently considering. If there's no further items to be raised under the review of management comments, which is essentially the part of the recommendations we're currently working through, what I'd like to actually just do is summarise that essentially this last body of work has been around those additional management comments on topics raised by submitters that were not formal consultation items, and the options where we either accept all the management comments or we note where council wishes to depart from any management comments, provide amended wording and accept the remaining comments. So obviously the second option is what we have just worked through, and rather than sit here now and go through all of those items we've discussed, I'd just like to propose that we accept that recommendation with that wording, acknowledging that those amended comments will come back to us for review prior to the final adoption of our long-term plan at the end of the month. Great.
A year or backward or whatever. At least it's in there.
The trick is just don't give Hastings the
Through you, Madam Mayor, apologies, I was just checking in with corporate, but we actually need the funding decisions today.
Oh no, we're going to move back to that next. Yeah, I'm just doing the management comments and then we'll go back to funding requests. Yeah.
Thank you. We are losing them.
We don't own a property.
We're being officers.
So if I could, I'll ask for a mover and seconder. We're just getting our wording. I'm going to shift them.
We're cool. We're cool.
Sorry.
Quick. Oh dear.
Just this one here, there was a comment from last person saying, why have we got houses at Harding Road? We're not actually houses at Kyoga Road, so they should have a comment saying, not ours.
Harding Road, I don't know if it's Kyoga or a dance.
It's not a category. Really? It says New Zealand. There's a set of flats saying Harding Road at the back of Harding.
Oh, the back of the next. Okay, no,
Yeah. It's not a biggie, but I just think, we get the blame.
We went through in such a hurry.
But it's not let's just get blamed for asking, not someone else's.
Okay, so we have our recommendation here that we review the management comments on topics raised by submitters that were not formal consultation items, and that the amended and remaining wording of these management comments be accepted and circulated for review prior to final adoption of the long-term plan. I've moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Deputy Mayor Brosnan. All those.
Can I just say something? I just want to thank our staff for the amazing job they've done in pulling all these comments together. It's been a huge task, and it's very impressive to see how comprehensive and thorough they have been with responding to those comments. So thank you very much, and well done.
Yes, absolutely. Right, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Now we'll move back to funding requests, and we will pull up onto the screen now the recommendations that we compiled earlier from the specific funding requests we received, and we'll add our 2 new funding requests that have come through from our latest deliberations. I think it's probably safe to say that the majority of these we can take as read from our previous deliberations, and I think really that we probably just want to add into the table the Women's Memorial Rest.
Memorial Square, is it?
Is that a funding?
Well, it's our own funding.
Yeah.
And we need to add it into the dollars. Yeah.
Women.
It's not approved yet. Not like.
It's in Memorial Square, not 5 Square.
Yes, Memorial Square.
Through the Mayor, it's actually called the
We're just
Memorial.
updating that.
Oh, you got it.
Okay, excellent. And we have a new one to add as well for the Central Football Artificial Turf. Oh, you've got that there. You're onto it. First World War. Real. Okay. So we probably have a few scenarios here.
The building is actually called Memorial Square Community Rooms.
Thank you.
At this point. At this point.
My source.
You know how important it is to get the name right.
Yeah, I think that's a name we've given it, but the name on the
actual,
building is.
Yeah.
Historic name.
Sorry,
Let's go with that one.
Post World War Memorial.
Not
That's
keen to
what's on the
deviate too
building.
much on that.
No.
I know.
And by Louis. And it's the National Council of Women, no apostrophes.
So currently,
First World War. Yep, that's right.
that's right.
Is that apostrophe right?
And it's just.
Yeah, no. Come on, Anna.
Yeah, no apostrophe, yes.
Okay, so to recap with the three significant capital funding requests within this table, we have the Regional Sports Park currently proposing a $1 million contribution to be paid in the 21-22 year, which will impact rates for the loan funding from the 22-23 year to the tune of 0.07%. Memory. We have the Central Football Artificial Turf, which, based on including all three of these funding requests, we could include in year 3. Again, loan funded, so we would be looking loan funded. Yep.
Oh, yeah, that's even better.
Hey, go easy on them.
Oh, am I getting
Got potential to go rage. No, these guys. Wait.
So I won't convert that into, well, it would be 0.035% because it's half of the million. And then the Women's Rest Memorial, 750,000, which we're proposing for year 2 to 3 for construction, with the feasibility study occurring in year 2. Oh. 0.08 with rounding for the regional sports park. Okay, so that's 0.04 for the football turf, and in between that for the Napier Women's Rest First World War Memorial, and the additional cost for the feasibility study for the Women's Rest First War Memorial, World War Memorial. So what I'd like to open up for discussion is what councillors' direction will be on the inclusion of all, part or none of these 3 funding requests. Recognising that some of them will have very, very little impact in terms of us having to have the capacity around deliverability, which also needs to be taken into consideration. Others will be more of a burden on our internal resourcing, and that we have phased these currently so that if all 3 were included, it would smooth the rates impact over years 2 and 3 of the long-term plan.
Excuse me, through the Mayor, can we just have a minute for officers to read through these? Sorry, Adele, I didn't quite pick up that point. Was it women's rest? Yes.
2 minutes.
Oh.
Women's rest.
Women's rest.
Do we have the women's rest one?
Just through the Mayor, so the $100,000, due to our caps on rates in the first year, we're at our limit, and so my recommendation is that is included in year 2, unless council would like to lift and go above the cap in year 1.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
The cost of the feasibility and associated resourcing costs would be an operating cost of council. At the moment, we are at our rates cap at the 8% in year 1. So the recommendation is to include that in year 2, unless council wishes to breach that cap in year 1.
I think that's how I read it.
Currently, we do have it sitting in year 2 for the feasibility study.
And point A.
But just also noting in C.
We could.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Sorry,
2. Yeah.
And, through you, Madam Mayor, can I just scroll down to the bottom with respect to the comment made from Te Tai Whenua? Sorry, the feedback. My apologies there. I do recall that Te Tai Whenua made a request for funding in their verbal submission, but that was new information and not included in their submission. So I just wanted to make that point that that can't be included in this long-term plan. So thank you. I was just checking that.
Councillor McGrath.
Yeah, I'd be quite keen to pull the central football field a year closer if possible. I'm certainly not a fan. Well, I am a fan of the sports park, but I'd prefer not to fund that with the dollars we've got, and would prefer to pull the artificial turf forward. But if push came to shove and we had to play nicely and share, I don't know if there's an option to split the funding to Hastings, half now, do the turf second, and then the other bit of funding later. I don't know, what are the options out there?
If I may, just to assist in your discussion on that, part of the reason about year 3 was absolutely financial, but also about our own ability for deliverability of that project with respect to some of the surrounding infrastructure that may need to be upgraded to facilitate that project as well. So part of the point of difference with the regional park is there's no real onus on our team in terms of deliverability, but with that project it would be good to wrap a bit of work around it rather than just the delivery of a turf. So year 3 allows us that ability to do that program of works. John, getting reasonably, I'm not quite sure I've summarised that correctly.
Yeah, what are those other works that we could do around it? I'd be
toilets.
Sorry.
Toilets.
Through you, Madam Mayor, toilets. There's no immediately accessible toilets for that end of the Park Island. The whole point of an artificial turf is to provide for greater utilisation at all hours of the day. So lighting would also be required at a cost of $500,000 to $1 million. Potentially additional car parking. I could imagine the turf for a football field we use at the same time as the turf for the hockey field. So there's no cross-utilisation of car parks in that space. So I'm throwing some ideas out there. We'd obviously need to do the work, but these are the sorts of things that we need to consider.
Could I have just some clarification around exactly where within the Park Island Southern Sports Hub this artificial turf would be going? I'm thinking I might be thinking of the wrong place.
Next to the current Blue Water Stadium, to the back of it, so there's actually a set of toilets directly across the road, 2 car parks directly across the road.
That it is where I was thinking then, where I thought there was already access to those types of facilities.
Through you, Madam Mayor, from memory, and I don't have it in front of me, but the master plan for Park Island Southern Precinct does include a toilet block just to the east of Blue Water, and car parking in that space. The artificial turf would be to the Whararangi Road side of the Blue Water Stadium, from memory again, and it's, that's not recently that I've viewed that document, but I think from a convenience point of view, excuse that pun, toilet blocks would be required close to that turf for the utilisation. I don't know that people are going to walk all the way over to where our current toilet block is, a long way away.
Councillor Mawson.
Yeah, there's actually already a lot of activity that happens out the back of that space. Obviously, I was doing a little bit of coaching for the City Rovers at one point, and so I mean at least sort of 2 times per week out the back of that has been used anyway. So I imagine that being an artificial court, I appreciate where you're coming from, John, but I think it's already been used in that anyway. I think that it could be done in stages.
With regard to what, sorry?
Sorry, with regard to the turf.
Well, and any additional amenities.
Any additional amenities
could be staged later.
I do appreciate though that parking is an issue though. It is an issue at the moment. But yeah, as I say, I've 2 nights a week I had 20, 30 players out there, back of that area already.
Councillor Price.
That we're probably trying to guess what's going to happen there, because the facilities mightn't quite be enough for a lot of grounds in behind that cover one, and there's probably a little bit of research required just to know where you're heading on it.
I guess I'm conscious that the Central Football Club have indicated that they're only seeking funding for the artificial turf, and they have requested a time frame of it being ready for the 2024 play season. I think we would need to get an understanding with them and a commitment from them that we were only undertaking to contribute funding for the artificial turf, but that we could potentially meet their desired time frame on the basis of it being simply the artificial turf with no other upgrade to amenities.
Do we know what conversations we've had with them in the past of exactly what we would be providing at that end, or because it's our plan?
I think, if I may be so bold, this is part of the problem. So having it in year 3 allows us to pull all those pieces of work together.
Councillor Taylor.
My recollection is that we did a master plan for Park Island, and that was then amended, I think in 2017, and there was a number of alterations that were made having consulted with the sports groups, and that the change that sport and participation and those types of things were all taken into consideration. And I recollect that the football talked about it having been withdrawn, that originally in the concept was for 3 artificial turfs in the whole complex, 1 for hockey, 1 for football and 1 for Hawke's Bay Rugby. And so 1 was withdrawn, and I think we have come a long way from the original plan, and like Councillor Price, I'm not 100% sure exactly where and what our commitment is to doing that. In saying that, and I obviously am very supportive of the regional sports park, from the point of view that it's up and running, it's not something that we actually have to put officer time and funding into, and that when we look at 500,000 visits in 2022-23, 40% of which are predicted to come from Napier residents, that's 200,000 visits from Napier people to the regional sports park. I think it's for $1 million in comparison, that is one that we should really focus, not drop out.
Information, yeah.
Just through the Mayor, so the notes that we made in the preparation of the long-term plan was a consideration, as I mentioned before, around our debt funding. And so we did remove the component of the southern and the northern funding that we'd put aside, which met the long-term plan, master plan requirements of the whole project. What we did indicate is we would have to come back in the next LTP to review that and to look at what the financial implications of that's going to be.
Opening up for views of any, perhaps if we deal with the women's rest initially, and if that will be left in here, and then we'll return to the two sports. Is there anyone opposed to this funding? Okay. So moving to the regional sports park. No. Councillor Tapani.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. So I'm quite happy to reconsider my perception of value and how that might be returned back to Napier City. But a key factor in my thinking is I do recall that at some stage in the last 12 months, a conversation around a regional sporting strategy to help sort of give us a good concept of where we can each participate in all these different spaces. And so where's that at, and how is it available for, where is that at?
Through you, Madam Mayor, so that as part of the Sports Hawke's Bay submission, they were seeking support for the regional sporting strategy to be reignited, really, as it has not been complete at this time. And they were seeking some advice as to what sort of governance would look like for the delivery of that. They're matters which I can take offline to continue to deliver on that.
Can I just ask a question of clarification? I'm conscious that the Community Fitness Centre Trust, or the makeup of them, didn't come and speak to us at submissions. Did it not work for them? I mean, it's a significant request. And we haven't had the opportunity to ask them direct questions as well.
They did, in their written submission, offer to come and speak to us. I think the only reason they didn't insist on doing it is that I think we have actually had them present to us at least 6 times over the last 3 years. So they were aware that we have a lot of information on what they're proposing.
Thank you.
Could I just make a comment in relation to the Chief Executives? The development of the strategy has grown out of the Regional Sports Park, Sport Hawke's Bay, Hastings District Council, and the Community Fitness Trust, and inviting Napier City to be part of that. It is being driven by Hastings District Council because the land is owned by them out there, and Sport Hawke's Bay have offered to contribute 50% of the cost for the consultant, and that the other parties, Hastings, the Regional Sports Trust, and in Napier City are invited to share the other half of the cost. So the cost to Napier City could be possibly about $6,000 for that piece of work to be done for the whole region.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Just in the interest of us trying to move forward with this, I'd just like to confirm with you, Adele, currently based on the proposals we have in here with relation to those 3 particular projects and the way that we've proposed to phase them, we can essentially do all 3 of them and sit within our rates caps limits over those 3 years of the long-term plan.
Through the Mayor, with the timing being outside of the year 1 and going through into year 2 and 3, the answer is yes.
Okay. Again, except perhaps you did mention that the 100,000 set aside for the feasibility study on the women's rest, that would, if in year 2 it's fine?
That's correct. We've got a small capacity in year 2 for that.
So, putting this out for people's view, I'd like to suggest that we do leave all 3 funding requests in here with the reassurance that we've had that we will remain within our rates caps and other limitations by phasing them the way that we have. So open up to councillors for deliberations. Councillor Price.
I agree with you.
I do too.
I think, is there anyone who disagrees?
Yes.
To some degree.
To some degree.
I think from my perspective it achieves a balance where we are showing that we do have a commitment to facilities like the Hawke's Bay Community Fitness Trust, which is a regional facility that we know a large number of Napier residents access. But by reducing that to $1 million instead of the requested 2, that has allowed us to be able to fund 2 Napier-based facilities as well. So it provides us with a well-balanced outcome. Okay. We will just, I think, give everybody an opportunity to read through all of these funding request recommendations, because then we will be asking for a mover and seconder and moving them in bulk. Councillor Brown. It's a good idea. Are we able to email that? Yeah, and then... And we could perhaps actually just have a 5-10 minute adjournment to give people a break and give councillors an opportunity to read through that.
Thank you, Your Worship.
So we can do tomorrow.